going on, guys? I just want to take a few minutes to talk to you about a message that God put on my heart today. I pray that it's something that maybe you could take. You could just take it in with open heart and open mind, and it could give you some revelation. It could give you some direction through whatever trials you may be going through. And I titled this, "God, Where Are You?" It's going to actually come from John chapter 11. But, how often have we been in situations in our life to where we feel like God has abandoned us in the moment, in the heat of the battle, in the midst of the destruction, in the midst of the chaos? We're crying out to God, and we're depending on Him fully with all of our hearts, so much that we know that if He does not move, that we're just going to perish away. Right now, I know with all the coronavirus and everything else going on that there's a lot of people that can relate to this. Businesses are shut down. There's families that was seeking healing through the church that are not able to be there anymore. It's a sad time, and it's just I think the enemy's having a heyday right now through the chaos and through the isolation that a lot of us are facing. But in this story, I'm going to talk about a group of people who fully depended, that ultimately, intimately loved God. They fully depended on Him, and, received a word that brought them hope. And even after receiving the word of hope, what they feared the most happened. And they ultimately, was left wondering, God, why'd you abandon me? Why'd you betray me? And I just wanted to take a minute to share it because like I said, today God put this on my heart, and He did it in such a way that just I knew I had to share it with anybody who was willing to listen. So I pray that you will take a few minutes to hear me through on this. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a speaker. I'm just a man who tries to share what God shares with me. But how often have we felt abandoned and betrayed by God? How often have we done right? We put complete trust and faith in a God only to end up feeling like He turned His back on us in the midst of our problem. It's one thing to only call on God when you need something. I think as long as we're being honest with ourselves, we know that that's a completely different issue. But when you know that you're obediently serving God, when you're obediently walking in Him, you're letting Him lead, that He is He is leading you to do things that make no sense to you, yet you're still doing it because you want to walk in obedience. You're trusting Him. You're allowing Him to lead. You're studying the Word. You're pouring your heart into Him. And yes, that is a thing. I don't care what anybody says. As we take our walk as a Christian, if you would, in the beginning we hear about this God, we know of God, we know of these stories of God, but as you grow, as you get deeper in your walk with Him, it comes a point to where you don't want to just know of Him anymore. You want to know Him, and you don't want to just know Him. You want to intimately know Him. And here in the past, I don't know, a year or two, that was kind of the journey I was on, where I wanted to intimately know Jesus. I didn't want to call on Him when I needed Him. I didn't want to sing these little lullaby bedtime prayers that did nothing. I wanted to learn. I wanted Him to pour Himself out into me as I poured myself out into Him, so that He could build me up in a way to where my prayers move mountains, so that I can dwell in His presence, so that I can just hear His voice, so that I can speak to Him. I wanted to be, and I still do. I want to intimately know Jesus Christ. I want to intimately know our Lord God. But fast forward to the story here, John chapter 11, verse 3. It says that, so the sister sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." And this is speaking of Lazarus. But right there it tells me, Lord, the one you love is sick. They were calling on Him. They were calling on Him because they knew Him. He knew them. There was an intimate relationship there. This right here goes hand in hand with people like me, people like you that have poured themselves out into God and trusted in God, and yet we're still facing trials. We're still calling on Him, and we're waiting on an answer. Well, in verse 4, He gives an answer. When He heard this, Jesus said, "The sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." So they call on God. They're not just calling because they need Him. They're just not calling Him to we're not talking about a group of people that's just wanting to use him for a miracle. We're talking about people who loved him, that cared about him, and knew that, hey, this is our only hope. They call on him just like we call on him in our time of need. And he gave them direction. He gave them a word. He gave them a promise. And a lot of us have received promises. We've the Bible's full of promises that if you walk in obedience, the blessings that come with it. It talks about the blessings of a righteous man, a righteous woman. It talks about all these things that if you get right with God and you align yourself with him, good things will happen. And when you get deeper in your walk with God, you begin in your talk to trust in every word, trust in everything. So I think these people did just that. When they received word that the sickness will not end in death, I could just only imagine that, they took a sigh of relief and they probably went on about their business. And even though it looked like things was probably getting worse as time went by, they was reminding themselves, God's in control, Jesus is in control, Jesus has got this. That's the same thing that we do. Businesses are shut down, sicknesses is coming up, families are falling apart. It's just whatever the case may be. We're reminding ourselves. We're trying to tell ourselves in the midst of the fire, in the midst of the chaos, that God, you are in control. You're in control. I know that you've got this, Lord. I'm trusting in you. I don't know what your plan is, Lord, but I'm just going to trust in you to glorify yourself. I'm going to trust in you to give me the provision I need. Give me the direction. Give me the healing. Give me the answers. Well, unfortunately, things didn't play out the way these people wanted them to. It says later on that Lazarus dies, and actually Jesus shows up 4 days later after he's been in the tomb for 4 days. He doesn't show up until 4 days after this man is dead. The same man that he said the sickness will not end in death, he shows up 4 days after he's in the tomb. And I could have just imagined the frustration and the anger and just emotions that are going through their minds as they're wondering, how could you do it? How could you lie to me? Why would you allow this to happen? And he shows up, and when he shows up, he's reminded by one of the sisters of the same thing that every one of us reminds him, probably day in and day out, as we shake our fists at the heavens. In verse 32, it says, when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And I'm reminded of the times where I've trusted and just thought, how could this happen? You led me to do this. You led me to take this on. Or God, you said that if I changed these things about myself, that if I would put away this would come. But it's not working out like you said it would. My life is falling apart. And why? Do you not love me? Do you not care? Have I done something wrong? Am I ignorantly just betraying you? If only you would do what you said you was going to do, none of this would happen. I wouldn't be going through this if you would do what you said you was going to do. If you would hold up your end of the bargain, none of this would happen. I'm holding up my end of the bargain. And I think that's the way these people felt. It goes on to say that when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And Jesus wept. We've all heard that right there. Jesus wept 1,000,000 times. But have you ever stopped to think, why was he crying? He already knew that he was going to heal the man. He already knew what the outcome was going to be. There was nothing for him to cry about. And then you realize that he was crying for the pain of those that he loved. Even though he knew the outcome, people that he loved had endured a hardship. People that he had loved had endured suffering through this situation that was needed for him to accomplish his will. Nevertheless, these people that he loved, that was crying out to him, wondering where he was so moved that he cried with them. And that right there it's kind of awing to me that we could be in a situation where we feel like God's nowhere around and he's got this bigger plan in mind And even though he knows how it's going to end, he cares so much about us that he'll cry with us when he knows what's going to come about. You know, and you kind of ask yourself, why? Because it goes on to say that he raised him from the grave. You know, it goes on to say that Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out. So you wonder, why did all this happen? John chapter 11, verse 15, and it says, this is the answer. And for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. You know, Jesus could have prevented this death 1,000,000 times over. He could have come in at any point when Lazarus was sick, and he could have spoke healing. I just picture him on a couch, you know, the way we do, especially us men. You know, we get a little bellyache or flu or something like that, and we're just, oh Lord, we're dying. Calling on somebody to take care of us. We just poor baby us. And that's kind of the way I picture him at that point. It's him being on this couch. Sure, he's in pain. Sure, it's not looking good, but he'd probably been there 100 times before. If Jesus would have walked in at that point, he'd have got the healing. He would have been grateful for it. The family would have probably, you know, praised him for it. But I would only imagine that it would be quickly forgotten. That situation would be quickly swept under the rug. And I guess the blessing, in a way, if you try to look at it from God's perspective, is what is the glory in that? If I'm going to do these things for these people, every time something little happens, how am I ever going to build their faith? How am I ever going to strengthen them? How am I ever going to make them love me and appreciate me in a way that I want them to? So, unfortunately, for Lazarus' family, he allowed it to happen so that he could glorify himself, so that he could build up these believers. You know, it speaks of a crowd of Jews being with these people. We're not talking at this point. We're not talking about just Lazarus and his sisters being affected by the healing or by the answer to their prayers. He done it in such a magnificent way at this point, where many people were touched. And I think that's what we got to remind ourselves whenever we're in situations where the death has already come, or we feel like it's too late, or maybe we're just on the verge of the death. You know, we just feel like everything's about to fall apart, and we feel like God's nowhere to be found. We feel like He's ignoring us. We feel like He's just abandoned us. I feel like He has betrayed us. You know, Jesus Himself endured this on the cross. You know, He's on the cross and He cries out, Father, why have you forsaken me? You know, that just shows you that the struggles of this world, they're not little. You know, a lot of us face issues that other people have no clue of. A lot of us face issues that are minute when compared to others. But every hardship is hard in one way or another. And even though you may be going through something bigger than I am, or I may be going through an issue that is probably bigger than yours, or maybe not, it doesn't matter. The size of the problem shouldn't be the focus. God should be the focus. God getting the glory should be the focus. And I think we just got to remind ourselves when we're in these issues that have seemed to have went past the point of no return, that the only reason God is allowing that to happen, if His word, if His promises speak otherwise, is because He's getting ready to do something bigger than we could ever comprehend. He's getting ready. He's allowed it to happen because He's decided that, you know, I'm not just going to touch you in this situation whenever I bring the healing, when I bring the answers, when I bring the provision. I've decided I'm no longer just going to touch you and your family. I'm going to touch you and your church. I'm going to touch you in your community. I'm going to touch you in your business. I'm going to glorify myself in such a way that you and everybody around you cannot deny that I am God. So even though that does not make enduring the hardship any easier, I think it gives me a lot of hope in the enduring. And I pray that this message is something that'll bring some hope and some maybe some excitement to you with what's going on right now. You know, ultimately, God is going to get the glory. He's a sovereign God. He's not going to share it with anybody, and He's not going to be swayed by our emotions, whether good or bad. Unfortunately for us, no matter how much we cry out in uncomfort or pain or agony, He's going to allow His will to happen. But His will is always for good of those that believe in Him. His will is always to glorify Himself, and it's all for a bigger and better plan. He's never doing anything to spite us. He's never doing anything to turn His back on us. Ultimately, He loves us, and He's willing to do whatever it takes to affect us and affect those that we love and that we care about in such a way that it's going to radically change their lives. And I just pray that as you go through your struggles during this time, and you and your family face these hardships, that you just remember that God is in control, that He does have the final say-so, and He already knows how it's going to end. So keep your faith in that. Keep your faith in God. Study the Word, study the Scripture, and just continue to pour yourself out into Him and trust that even though we may not feel His presence, He is right there. When we're crying, I want to believe that He's crying. But ultimately, He's going to get the glory. The goodness is going to come from the situation. And we're going to be glad we endured it when it's all said and done. I love y'all. I just pray that God will bless you and give you direction, give you the provision you need to endure this week, endure this trial. And I pray that in the end, you experience many, many blessings. Amen.